Hi there, Social Studies 20, taking a look here at the Holodomor, which translates to death by hunger. This is another example of genocide, ethnic cleansing, in this case, the Ukraine, part of the former Soviet Union in the 1930s. So this, quickly description would be it's a very systematic and forced starvation of about 7 million people. Could be more. I mean, we'll never be sure, for certain how many it was. The records. There's very few records of it standing in existence, and this happened within just 1 year. This was between 1932 and 1933 in Ukraine. That's about 25% of its population at the time. Very significant and serious ethnic cleansing, but I mean, they all are. You do need some background to understand this genocide. In 1917, 1918, the Russian Bolsheviks overthrew Tsar Nicholas II, who was the Tsar of Russia. You don't need to know a lot about that. They were led by a guy named Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks overthrow the Tsar, topple that monarchy, and take over and implement communism. Leader was Vladimir Lenin. Lenin died in 1924, and the next leader of the Communist Party, the government of Russia, which is now the Soviet Union, was Joseph Stalin. So Joseph Stalin will be the dictator, the leader of the Soviet Union that conducts this genocide of the Ukrainians in 1932, 1933. Some further background that you need: when Stalin takes over, and Lenin for that matter too, Russia had not even begun its industrial revolution. And so when Stalin seizes control, his number one goal is to industrialize, modernize the Soviet Union. He wants to do it in about 15 years. It took other countries about 150. He wants to do it in about 15 years. So there's a great sense of urgency for Stalin to accomplish this. And as you'll learn in grade 12, usually when a dictator takes over, well, practically always, they purge any threat to their leadership. So when dictators take over, they purge, they eliminate opposition to their leadership in what is called a purge. And Stalin's going to do that too. He's going to murder his political opposition, even his suspected political opposition. He'll murder the people that are innocent, were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This will be a giant purge. Um, his takeover of the Soviet Union was met with a lot of opposition, um, especially in Ukraine. And so the concept of Ukrainianization um, was a call for Ukrainian self-determination. At this time, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. They didn't want to be. They wanted to be independent. They wanted self-determination, but they had been absorbed by the Soviet Union and didn't have sovereignty. So Ukrainization is a call for Ukrainian self-determination that Stalin would have seen as an internal threat to the existence of the Soviet Union. And so he's going to respond with what is called Russification. Um, Russia comes first. You have to be absorbed by Russia. You have to give in to the takeover of your country by Russia. Russification. And you'll have to, embrace and inherit Russian culture along with that, which means that your unique ethnicity and culture is going to be eliminated in place of Russification. Let me show you on a map. So here we go. So at this time, countries like the Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, all these countries in green were not independent. They were part of the greater Soviet Union. They wanted sovereignty, but they didn't have it. They'd been absorbed by the Soviet Union. Ukraine was one of those countries. You also need to understand, too, that even though Russia looks big and is big on a map, not all of it, is adequate for farming. In fact, the bulk of Russia is not arable territory. The Fertile Triangle, the best agriculture for the best land for growing things agriculturally was Ukraine, and that's going to be important. And so Stalin takes over the Soviet Union, imposes Russification. Another one of his policies was forced collectivization. And this is an economic policy, again, you learn more about in grade 12, but you need to understand a bit right now to get the Holodomor. Forced collectivization simply meant the government took your private property. The government seized your private property and they didn't pay for it. They didn't pay you back, they didn't reimburse you, they just took it. You would call it theft, and in many ways it is theft. So the Soviet government under Stalin would come to your farm and they'd confiscate it. We're taking your farmhouse. We're taking your farmland. We're taking all your crops. We're taking your cattle. We're taking everything. And you have nothing. So you can imagine that this policy was met with resistance. I don't blame them. I'd say, no way, you're taking my stuff. I've worked hard for it. It's been in my family for years. You're not just taking my farm. How am I going to make a livelihood now? So part of the Soviet policy was forced collectivization. We're taking your private property. A lot of people resisted it, and I don't blame them. I would have resisted it too. One of the groups that really resisted it were the kulaks. The kulaks were wealthy farmers that owned a lot of the farmland that was the best for growing things. The kulaks happened to be Ukrainians. That was just their territory. So the kulaks were Ukrainians who violently resisted Stalin's policy of forced collectivization. So we killed him for it. And the way he did it was he starved them to death. Uh, this is a communist country, which means that the government owns everything, especially all the food. And so Stalin decided, he would confiscate your food, he'd confiscate everyone's food, and he would decide who got food and who didn't get food. Because the kulaks wouldn't go along with collectivization, he wouldn't give them food. He starved them to death. He took their food, but he didn't give them any in return. And they starved to death by the millions because of it. So this was a complete artificial man-made famine. It did not have to happen. It was not the hand of nature. It was because of a government political policy. It was because of ethnocentrism. It complicates things a bit, and you learn more about it in grade 12. But Stalin is finishing off what is called a Marxist revolution. And to finish off a Marxist revolution, you need to eliminate what are known as the bourgeoisie, the rich people in society. And so Stalin has labeled the kulaks as his bourgeoisie, the rich people that he's got to get rid of. Hence the Holodomor. And you'll watch a video on it in a few minutes, but it's hard to describe. Um, Stalin would send his secret police out. His troops would go out through all of the Ukraine and confiscate all of the food. They went to great pains to find the food. They took your crops, they took your livestock, they searched your house from top to bottom for food. They also sealed the Ukraine's borders so they couldn't get food from other places and other countries in the Soviet Union. The famine was discovered, and other countries offered international aid to combat the famine, but Stalin, of course, refused because he wants there to be a famine. He wants to get rid of the kulaks and the Ukrainians. So your results, I guess, are predictable. Man-made genocide through famine, death by hunger, the Holodomor. Ukraine's political leadership was destroyed. He eliminated the Ukraine as a threat to the security of the Soviet Union. And it wasn't until 1991 that Ukraine would finally get its political sovereignty from the Soviet Union. Most people don't know about the Holodomor. I didn't learn about it in high school. It wasn't until the Soviet Union fell in 1991 that a lot of these records that had been kept under close secret and security by the Soviet government, it wasn't until then that these secrets became public knowledge. And then people begin to discover them, they read them, they write about them, they've made movies about it, and so on. So it's becoming common knowledge. But for the longest time, it was just a well kept dark secret of another genocide that we've been looking at as a result of ultranationalism. Um, a lot of the kulaks, rather than just hand over their stuff to the Soviet communists, burnt it or destroyed it or killed their livestock. Um, and hence your Holodomor. Sad, sad chapter in history.